Yesterday, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo threatened Iran with the strongest U.S. sanctions in history over its nuclear aspirations and a wide range of other topics. Some speculate that the United States just declared war with Iran. Will this be the spark that leads to the prophesied Sixth Trumpet War or World War III? And if so, are you prepared for a nuclear attack should it reach the shores of the United States of America? We will discuss the possibility of these future scenarios on today's edition of End of the Age. Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining me for Tuesday's edition of End of the Age. And over the years, as I've done my Bible studies here in the End Time Television studios, I've conducted hundreds of Bible studies here, and I've told the people the reason for these Bible studies is to prepare you mentally for the times just ahead and physically, and then to prepare you spiritually for eternity. And as we would go through the Bible studies, when we hit like World War III or some of these devastating things, we would stop and spend some time on preparation, physical, mental, and spiritually, for a possible World War III scenario should that touch the shores of the United States. So I'm going to go through kind of a World War III scenario here today because many people don't even think about it. They're not worried about it. Hey, that's years away. But we know it's one of the next two prophetic fulfillments on God's timeline. And so we need to talk about it. And it's always been a alarming thing and something people are really interested in when we hit that phase of our Bible study. So I'm going to devote my program today to preparing you mentally, knowing what's coming down the pike, prophetically speaking, and then we'll talk about some physical preparation for a possible World War III nuclear type scenario. So why do I say this? Well, Deb Kafal reported that Mike Pompeo said that Iran is a world threat and is in for the strongest U.S. sanctions in history. So yesterday, on May 21st, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo threatened Iran that unless it meets 12 U.S. conditions, the Islamic Republic faces unprecedented financial pressure. And in a speech to the Heritage Institute, he laid out an exceptionally tough policy as a follow-up to the U.S. exit from the 2015 nuclear accord. And the conditions he laid down raised a stop sign for European efforts as well to salvage the accord by persuading Iran to renegotiate its terms, and efforts that have been spearheaded by the French President Emmanuel Macron. And Pompeo made it clear that any improvements or amendments to the original deal, which he said puts the world at risk because of its flaws, were no longer open to discussion. Instead, he slapped down before Tehran a long list of conditions as an ultimatum to comply or face the strongest sanctions in history once they came into full force. And he added that the string of sanctions will only grow more painful if the regime does not change course. Now put yourself in Iran's shoes hearing this speech yesterday. So as for the European business relations with Tehran, Pompeo made it clear that punitive sanctions would also be applied to those who breach the U.S. sanctions, talking about Europe, which is a huge threat in itself as well. And then Pompeo spoke of unprecedented financial pressure on Iran, which he called the world's leading sponsor of terrorism, which it is. And he predicted that the Islamic Republic would be battling to keep its economy alive under the sanctions and will have to choose between maintaining its economy or sponsoring terrorist and insurgent groups like Hezbollah, Hamas, or Islamic Jihad in countries like Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and Yemen. So you understand that what they've done with the sanction relief that the Iran deal gave them, they haven't been helping their people in Iran with that. They've been supporting these terrorist proxies in all these different nations, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and Yemen. And so that's why Mike Pompeo also was talking to the Iranian people as well and saying, hey, we're with you and we're going to try to help you in this situation. We're going to put sanctions to try to keep them from supporting these terrorist proxies around the Middle East. And then you need to elect new leaders and change your government, change your system. How do you want to live? And so that's what he was talking about in the speech. Now, the key demands that Pompeo laid down for Iran included this. Now, put yourself in Iran's shoes and listen to this. So when we get back from the break, I know I'm coming up to a break now, I'll give you the demands that Pompeo laid down for Iran. And what I want you to do again is to put yourself in Iran's shoes, because this is the leading sponsor of terrorism in the world. How would you take this? Many people are saying it could lead to war with Iran.
The End Time Prophecy Tour was the most wonderful tour. I would like to thank Irvin and Judy Baxter for a fabulous trip to Israel. I know it took much effort and planning to make it successful. What a tremendous time we all had, which warrants a great big thank you. You can't encapsulate it into words. You can't capture it with a photograph. You just have to experience Israel yourself. The Queen of Sheba said, "The half has not been told." I concur. What an awesome experience to visit the land of Bible history and see it come alive as you walk its paths. I shall be forever changed. Dale from Louisiana.
Join us October 25th through November 5th, 2018. You too can experience Israel with Irvin and Judy Baxter. Go to endtime.com or call 1-800-ENDTIME. That's 1-800-363-8463 to sign up today.
If ever people need to hear the unvarnished truth, it is now. There are some subjects that are not politically correct to talk about, but they're urgent. That's why I'm grateful for End Time Magazine. If you're not a subscriber, you're missing information that will really impact your life. End Time has a bi-monthly magazine that explains how current events are fulfilling Bible prophecy. You can get a 2-year subscription for only $29. You can also get a bulk subscription and pass them out to your church. We have gotten reports that End Time Magazine has caused spiritual awakenings in churches when they see the prophecies being fulfilled right now. You can start your own ministry and leave them in doctors' offices, libraries, laundromats. You never know if you might be responsible for saving someone who is searching for the unvarnished truth. That's what the magazine has done in many lives. Call 1-800-363-8463. That's 1-800-END-TIME and get your subscription today.
So yesterday, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo really threw the gauntlet down on Iran, and he said, look, we're going to issue unprecedented sanctions on you unless you do these several points. And this is number one. He said, you're going to be releasing all your nuclear materials on the military applications of its nuclear program to the International Atomic Energy Agency. So what they're doing is they're never going to allow Iran to have a nuclear weapon. So he's going to say, you're going to release all of that to the Atomic Energy Agency. Number two, he said, they're going to be halting all grades of uranium enrichment. Number three, dismantling enrichment facilities and their nuclear reactors. Number four, they got to give up the development of ballistic missiles, not just their nuclear program, but ballistic missiles, the method of delivering all of that, and to be able to attack Iran or Israel in different places, they're gonna curb that as well. Number 5, withdraw military forces from Syria. Number 6, discounting the support for Hezbollah and the Palestinian Hamas and Islamic Jihad. So they're really that's like I said, he's really threw the gauntlet down on Iran. Number 7, withdrawing its support from the Yemeni Houthi insurgency. Number 8, abandoning its threats to Red Sea shipping. Number 9, cutting off its arms supplies to the Taliban in Afghanistan. And number 10, putting a stop to the threats against Israel and the Gulf nations. So really more than just their nuclear program, Pompeo is trying, and the United States as a whole is looking to curb Iran's efforts towards controlling the Middle East, which is what they're endeavoring to do. Pompeo said that should Iran make major changes, the U.S. would be willing to lift the sanctions. And some sanctions have already been placed on Iran at this point. But they're going to get more and more as time goes on. They're going to monitor what Iran's actions are. Well, the key point to my program today, Debka file sources report that Pompeo's detailed ultimatum is going to be taken by Tehran as a declaration of war by America on the Islamic Republic. The maximum pressure policy for Iran was not unexpected in view of the forthcoming nuclear negotiations ahead of the Trump administration and North Korea. Tough U.S. sanctions are also seen to be well integrated with Israel's continuous military assaults on the military sites Iran has been establishing in Syria, the big land corridor they're trying to create from Tehran to the Mediterranean Sea. And the regime in Tehran is no doubt forcefully they've slammed Pompeo's ultimatum, and they may realize that by resuming uranium enrichment coupled with military steps, they could come back against the United States with that militarily. And according to Debka file, this is the key point. On Monday, yesterday, May 21st, the U.S. may be said to have gone to war against Iran. Now, folks, only time will tell if this is going to be the spark that leads to the prophesied Sixth Trumpet War or World War III. But we know it's coming, and it will be nuclear. This is of utmost importance here. A lot of people don't even like to talk about World War III, a coming nuclear war. Say, oh, that's pie in the sky, that'll never happen. The fact of the matter is that I'm putting together a timeline that will be published in the next issue of End Time magazine. It's going to give all the prophecies from the Messiah all the way to eternity past the great white throne of judgment. I've been working on it several days. It's the largest prophetic timeline I've ever seen. And so as I looked at that huge timeline, I looked at all the prophecies that have occurred up to this point. They've all been completely fulfilled. And the next two are the Sixth Trumpet War and the peace agreement in the Middle East on this huge timeline. And I thought, man, this is going to happen. And not in the too distant future. There's going to be a world war, and 1/3 of the world's population is going to be destroyed. And of course, that's found in Revelation 9, verse 13 through 21. It talks about the whole war there. And so what I wanted to do today, like I said in my Bible studies for years, I've prepared people mentally and physically, explaining to them what's coming from the prophecies of the Bible, what the future is going to look like, and then we prepare them spiritually for eternity. Because you may never live through all of that. God may take us out of here tomorrow. As far as I could be hit by a car or something, you never know. None of us are promised tomorrow. We know the rapture is not going to happen tomorrow. That's years away yet. But in looking down through time and the prophecies that are ahead of us, I wanted to prepare the people that I was teaching mentally, physically, and spiritually. So we're going to talk about some physical preparation today for a possible World War III. It's very important because this is very real. This scenario of this World War III will happen according to the prophecies of the Bible in the very near future. And there's a possibility that it could happen it could come to the shores of the United States. We need to talk about it. Now, I'm not going to talk about, hey, let's all sell everything we got and go live in Colorado in a cave somewhere. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about after Hiroshima and Nagasaki, when, at the end of World War II, when the two atomic bombs were dropped, there were people that still lived in those cities that survived. The whole cities weren't wiped out. If they were at ground zero, they were wiped out. But there were still people that lived in the cities that were not wiped out. So we need to talk about that. If it should reach the shores of the United States, which is possible, because look what we're doing with Iran right now. And what if Iran, the leading sponsor of terrorism on the planet, were to get a hold of a nuclear weapon? You say, well, we're going to cut that down and not allow them to get that. Well, it doesn't mean they couldn't purchase one from somebody else on the black market. Who knows? Dirty bombs where they could sneak them in suitcases and things. You never know what the scenarios are. And the reason I'm going to talk about this is because when world wars happen, and I talked about it being nuclear, we know it's going to be nuclear. 1/3 of the world's population is going to be destroyed. We know World War III is going to be a nuclear situation. And I wanted to talk about it today because you realize, let's go back through a little bit of history. Because world wars, think about this with me, world wars bring out the worst weaponry that are available at that time when a world war is going on, and it keeps getting worse and worse over time. So in World War I, think about it. War History Online records this. It says, an unprecedented and terrifying weapon, gas, arrived on the scene and on the battlefields of World War I. Few weapons at that time created as deep a sense of horror as poison gas. It was the first time it was used on a world war setting. There have been many wars up to that point, but gas, poison gas, had not been used until World War I. Because when world wars happen, everybody brings out the big guns, the things that are unprecedented weaponry, that comes out during a world war. And its arrival of this poison gas on the battlefields of World War I brought horrendous injuries and appalling deaths that were unprecedented in their unfamiliarity. The countermeasures worn by troops added to the psychological disturbance as alien-looking, they wore these bug-eyed masks that replaced human faces, and it was a horrible scene during World War I. These things had not been used up to that point. Poisonous gases weren't anything new, but they had never been used in a war until World War I. And it was the war in which poison gas played its most substantial and terrible part on the battlefields. The idea of using poison gas as a weapon was not new, like I said, but until World War I, it had been considered uncivilized that you would use something like that. But when a world war happens, it's Katie bar the door at that point. We're going to pull out the big guns and we're going to use everything we can use, the worst weapons known to man, to win that war. And the stalemate of the trenches on the Western Front in World War I, together with the indecisive but devastating battles in the East, they resulted in the commanders using gas at that point, this poisonous gas, and any way to break the stalemate, what they considered worth considering, because look at the cost that was involved and the ramifications. So the Germans were not the only nation working on gas weapons at that point, but they were the first to deploy them. The first effective gas attack was launched on April 22nd, 1915. World War I, remember I said during a world war the big things are pulled out, the big weaponry. World War I also introduced submarines and aerial bombardment, and it deliberately targeted aerial bombardments were deliberately targeted on civilians as well as the combatants. You drop a bomb from, a mile in the air, and you can't always guarantee where the thing's going to land. And Germany originated all three of these, and it was part of the policy of Schrecklichkeit, or terror, that shocked a world still clinging to really the 18th century conviction that wars should be fought only between armies on a battlefield and civilians should be spared. We went past that in World War I, and it was a conviction sealed with the solemn treaties among the European powers. Germany insisted instead that a nation fighting for its life and an inherent had an inherent right to use every means at the hands to defend itself during a world war. And its scientists and its engineers, military leaders, they argued as well that the new methods of mass killing were no worse than high explosives and might shorten the war and thus save lives. So let's just throw everything we got at them in an effort to shorten the time span of the war and save a lot of lives. But they killed hundreds and millions as a result. And these rationales proved small comfort to those who died choking on the chlorine gas, drowning in the churn of their torpedo luxury liner because of a submarine, which was introduced at that time, or burning in the inferno of a Zeppelin delivering the fall of fire bombs. So if you can see, that's World War I, that it was the worst things that could possibly be developed during that time, they used them in a world war. There have been other wars, but these huge, the biggest things used on the planet were not used up until this World War. Look at World War II. History.com records 1945 that it was the first time the atomic bomb was used in World War, in a war period. Since 1940, the United States have been working on developing an atomic bomb, and after having been warned by Albert Einstein that the Nazi Germany was already conducting research into nuclear weapons. By the time the United States conducted the first successful test of an atomic bomb, which was exploded in the desert in New Mexico in July 1945, Germany had already been defeated. The war against Japan in the Pacific, however, continued to rage. Well, President Harry Truman, warned by some of his advisors that any attempt to invade Japan would result in horrific American casualties, ordered the new weapon to be used to bring the war to a speedy end. Remember, this is the Second World War. On August 6, 1945, the American bomber Enola Gay dropped a 5-ton bomb over the Japanese city of Hiroshima. And it was a blast equivalent of the power of 15 tons of TNT. And it reduced 4 square miles of the city to ruins and immediately killed 80,000 people. Tens of thousands more died in the following weeks from the wounds and the radiation poisoning. Well, as a result, 3 days later, on top of that, 3 days later, another bomb was dropped on the city of Nagasaki, killing 40,000 more people. And then, as a result, a few days later, Japan announced its surrender. So you're following me, my train of thought here. World War I, the worst weapons known to man were brought out during the World War. Not up until that point. Then World War II. The worst weapon known to mankind, an atomic bomb, was used. It wasn't used at Germany, but it was used on Japan. So now we look forward to this future prophesied war, World War III. World War I, 8.2 million casualties. World War II, 52 million casualties. Well, World War III, the Bible prophesies that 1/3 of the world's population is going to be destroyed. You're not going to do that with conventional weaponry. It's not going to happen. 1/3 of the world. You're talking about, 2.5 billion people at this point? That's not going to happen with guns shooting bullets at each other. You're talking about a nuclear war at this point. Remember, during world wars, people pull out the biggest things they can find. And a lot of people have said, there's no way, we're never going to fire off nukes at each other. Well, let's talk about that. And let's talk about a nuclear bomb. Popular Mechanics states that here's how much deadlier today's nukes are compared to the World War II atomic bombs. Something we need to talk about, because we need to consider the devastation, and then how should I prepare physically, mentally, and spiritually for the times just ahead. The atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki at the end of World War II, they were codenamed the Little Boy and the Fat Man. And they respectively caused widespread destruction. Obviously, they leveled cities, killed between 90,000 and 160,000 people in Hiroshima, and about 20,000 of those were soldiers. So remember, it was a lot of civilians died. and between 39 and 80,000 in Nagasaki were killed as well. And these are the only two nuclear weapons ever used in warfare. And I would love to say, let's hope that it stays that way. But I know according to the Bible, it's not going to. And because some of the nuclear weapons today are, get this, they're 3,000 times as powerful as the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. I want to let that sink in. You say, well, you're trying to scare us. I'm preparing you mentally and physically for the times just ahead and spiritually for eternity. That's my goal today. It's not to scare you. And you know, I know we talk about these World War III scenarios and things like that, but if you're not prepared at all, let's say you just, put that out of my mind, I don't want to talk about it. Well, you can do that. It's your choice. But there may come a time when this happens here in the United States, and wouldn't you rather have had a game plan put together? What do I do? Possibly if this does happen. We know what's going to happen in the world. It's highly likely with what we have with the United States fingers in everything going on in the Middle East and around the world that it could reach our shore and we could suffer mass casualties here in the United States. And so we need to talk about it. And I know I'm talking to people all over the world. Forgive me. I mean, it's because I'm sitting here in Dallas, Texas that I keep referring to the United States. I was born and raised here. However, I know you guys in Australia and places like that, you need to prepare yourselves as well. So the little boy and the fat man, the atomic bombs or fission bombs, which set off a chain reaction of nuclear fission at that time, World War II, the atomic nuclei of the radioactive materials were split to create different elements. And that released a large amount of energy, splitting more atoms as a result of producing destructive explosion. And in the little boy, a bullet-like projectile made of uranium-235 was fired at a core of the same substance to set off a chain reaction. Well, when we get back, I'll talk to you about the fat man, the one that was dropped on Nagasaki, and what happened in that bomb, and then we'll get off into some of the preparation.
Let me tell you today about our exciting Armageddon collection. What does the term Armageddon mean? Why is it so important in Bible prophecy in the last days? And what will happen between now and then? In our Armageddon collection, we cover subjects such as events of the final 7 years, the revealing of the Antichrist, the mark of the beast, and the world's greatest revival just ahead. In this special collection, you will receive the DVD, Seeds of Armageddon, November 29, 2012, our 8-lesson series, From Here to Armageddon, along with a PDF of our 7-year timeline, and our informative DVD, First Step to Armageddon, December 23, 2016. All of this for your gift of $140 or more, plus the cost of shipping and handling. To order your Armageddon collection, go to endtime.com or call 1-800-END-TIME. That's 1-800-363-8463.
The End Time Prophecy Tour was the most wonderful tour. What an awesome experience to visit the land of Bible history and see it come alive as you walk its paths. I shall be forever changed. Dale from Louisiana.
Join us October 25th through November 5th, 2018. You too can experience Israel with Irvin and Judy Baxter. Go to endtime.com or call 1-800-END-TIME to sign up today.
If your station only carries the first 30 minutes of End of the Age, go to endtime.com and click the watch button to continue today's broadcast. You can also finish up later by clicking the archive button.
So now you can see how important or how devastating the atomic bombs were in World War II. They brought out the big guns, and that's what ended the war. That's when Japan surrendered just a few days later. And then I want to bring us forward, though, to World War III, because a lot of scenarios could lead us into World War III when you consider it. And when you look at the magnitude, the difference of the nuclear bombs today compared to the atomic bombs back in World War II. Our bombs today are many times, I mean hundreds of times more powerful and devastating than the atomic bombs. And you can see in World War III, remember what I said, in world wars, everybody, because of the consequences and because of what they're fighting for, and hey, our nation could be at stake, people will bring out things they would never use. I mean, consider this. We went through the Vietnam War, the Korean War, all these different communist regimes, the Bolshevik Revolution, all these different things, and nuclear bombs were never used during any of that, all those wars and different things that happens. These huge revolutions and the takeovers of countries, nuclear bombs were not used, atomic bombs were not used. But yet, when we come to a world war, everybody pulls out all the stops, no holds barred, and they use the big thing. So in World War III, nuclear weapons are going to be used. Now, you remember back here in January when Hawaii somebody was going to use the testing system, the alarm system for the islands, and rather than sticking off the testing system, he accidentally flipped the wrong switch and set off the actual alarm. And man, Hawaii, I mean, I've got friends in Hawaii, a pastor of a church down there, and he said we thought we were getting bombed. I mean, they went crazy for a long time until they got everybody settled down and say, hey, it was a false alarm. The problem is it possible that a false alarm or something like that, because here's the deal. Let's say we're sitting here in the United States. Irvin Baxter wrote a book years ago, China War and the Third Temple. His opening of the book was a guy sitting here watching the monitors for different things in the United States and possible bombs and different things come. Well, he sees these bombs coming. And what happened if this scenario, and as a result, he said, hey, we're getting attacked, and we fired our bombs back. Well, what would happen if this Hawaii scenario that happened earlier this year, that it was a false alarm, but yet somebody went ahead and shot off ours? And then Russia or China and says, hey, the United States shot theirs off. Hey, let's send theirs back. Consider that scenario just for a second. Could we accidentally go off into a nuclear war? You never know. I mean, when the Bible says it's going to start in the Middle East region, is there a scenario there where we could accidentally, perhaps we accidentally shoot down a Russian plane or something? You never know what's going to happen. That's the spark that sets this thing off. So we lead up to the Cold War. Now think about it. The United States and Russia going at it, but it was a Cold War because we never really shot off any weapons. They were considering, they're sitting back with their button on their finger on the button saying, hey, you shoot yours off, we'll shoot ours off. And we were doing the same thing, but yet they said, because we don't want to have mass destruction of both of our countries, it was a Cold War. There was like a stalemate. Well, when the Cold War ended nearly 3 decades ago, many believed that the danger of nuclear annihilation had gone away, because we thought, hey, you know, the Cold War's ended, the Berlin Wall was torn down. In 91, the USSR was dismembered, and so it was done away with. So at the moment, it seemed as if reason for the fear of this cataclysmic event, this nuclear war, it had receded, given that the United States and the two Koreas, think about it, in today's news, they're engaging in diplomatic maneuvering that could, at least from the American and the South Korean vantage, lead to the dismantling of North Korea's nuclear stockpile. So you think about kind of what's going on right now. In the world, there's this state of, hey, you know, that this cataclysmic event of a nuclear war, it's not going to happen. Let's put it out of our mind. We're kind of at ease. Although, if you remember during the Cold War, man, I mean, people were going to bed at night thinking, are they going to push the buttons tonight? But this is not the first new dawn on the Korean Peninsula. You think about what's going on right now with Donald Trump possibly meeting with Kim Jong-un, getting them to dismantle their nuclear stockpile. And a collapse of the negotiations would not be the first failure. There's no guarantee that North Korea and the United States will not return to the ready-to-fight mode of just a few months ago, when the North Korean's leader, Kim Jong-un, said that, hey, our nuclear button is always on my desk. And President Trump responded in a tweet that his own nuclear button was much bigger and more powerful. In the meantime, the leaders of the two countries most capable of mutual annihilation, Donald Trump and President Vladimir Putin of Russia, they've promised to modernize their own arsenals and to make them more menacing. So the decades of nuclear standoff between the United States and the Soviet Union, they were premised on the assumption that neither side would dare launch an attack because it would invite a devastating counterattack and amount to nations committing suicide. But a calculated launching of the missiles by one side or the other is not the big scare to some. And, you know, it could be as simple as, and some people have thought about with this, what's troubling is the increased potential for error inherent to increased weaponry, or a misread, a blip on a computer screen, or a false alarm like the one we had in Hawaii in January. So consider this. When international tensions are high, as they were in the depths of the Cold War, and as they have been in times as of late, the risks grows that we would blunder into a nuclear war. It may not happen with that scenario, but there are a lot of people that believe it could. It could be, in other words, it's either going to be on purpose or something, a blip on a computer screen, as simple as that, could set it off. And that kind of fear, really during the Cold War, it defined much of the 50s and 60s, and it vividly was captured in popular culture. And really, if some of you were around, it's what led the American grade school children that were taught to put their head under their desk at that time. So the question is, to some, could we accidentally end up in a nuclear war? Well, consider this. In September of 1983, this is a true story, folks. East-West tensions soared after the Soviet missiles shot down a South Korean civilian airliner. Many of you will probably remember it, and it killed 269 people. Well, having somehow deviated from its chartered course, it had entered the prohibited Russian airspace, totally by accident. And the plane may have been mistaken for an American spy plane, and Russia shot it down. So, less than a month later, a Soviet, their early warning system appeared to detect the launching of 5 missiles from an American base. So imagine the guy sitting there. This is a true story. A guy sitting there monitoring this, and he sees 5 missiles coming. So he appeared to detect that. But fortunately, a lieutenant colonel in the Soviet air defenses, he acted on his intuition. Rather than firing off nuclear weapons back, he decided after a nerve-wracking few minutes that it was a false alarm. And it was. There was a glitch in the system or something, and it was a false alarm at that point. They were ready to fire off, but he said, you know what, it's a false alarm, and it was a false alarm. Look how close we were to starting a nuclear war at that point, because if they'd have shot it off at the United States, we would have been in World War III within minutes. So think about it. The panic in Hawaii was a reminder of how easily things could go wrong. And perhaps also reinforced a lesson imparted in another culture touched on about nuclear dread. People thinking about, if you've been in a scenario like this, a lot of people that didn't come through the Cold War, you never felt that. Like, oh, Russia could, my father-in-law talks about it a lot, where he would go to sleep at night thinking, will the Russians push the button tonight? But if you've never lived under that, it's out of sight, out of mind. And, that was the same scenario in a 1983 film, War Games. And in this movie, which there was a military supercomputer it was put in control of the American nuclear arsenal. And thinking it was conducting a strategic exercise, the computer prepares to launch actual missiles. And until it comes to understand the global devastation that it would inflict. And so then it kind of backs off. So folks, my question is whether it is a mistake in the Middle East between Russia or the United States or some other nation, or whether it's an intentional attack, which leads to a nuclear response. One thing we know for absolute positive, 100%, World War III is going to happen, and it's going to happen in the near future, and it's going to be nuclear. You say, well, how can you be so sure, Dave? Well, some of these things are speculation. You know, how will the war happen? I mean, we came pretty close. There's been times when Russian fighters have come within just mere feet of our fighters or a United States plane in this Syria conflict. And you can read about it. There's lots of articles on that. Well, what would have happened if they would have actually fired and hit ours, or their plane hit our plane, or one of our ships? Well, we go into world war with Russia. It emanates right there out of the Middle East region, and we'd be in World War III the next morning. Well, remember what I said, when world wars occur, they use weaponry that they wouldn't use during the time of a normal conflict. Like Vietnam. There was no atomic bombs dropped. Think about it. In the Korean War, no atomic bombs dropped. But when you go into a world war scenario, that's when they bring out the worst. And so the prophecy, Revelation 9, 13 through 16, and the sixth angel poured out, and the sixth angel sounded. I heard a voice from the four horns of the golden altar, which is before God, saying to the sixth angel, which had the trumpet, loose the four angels which are bound in the great river Euphrates. The four angels were loosed, which were prepared for an hour a day, a month, and a year, for to slay the third part of men. So from these scriptures, and this is why I can say this with all confidence, from these scriptures we know that World War III will begin in the Euphrates River region. Number two, the 1/3 of the world population will be destroyed in World War III. And number three, there's going to be a 200 million man army that participates in this war. So we don't have to question, is there going to be a World War III? From the prophecies of the Bible, we know there's going to be. And it just kind of brought it to light with this huge timeline I'm working on, that all of the prophecies that have occurred up until this point, I mean, folks, before the World War III, they've all occurred. They're all done. We've watched them occur already. So when we get back from the break here, we know the war's coming. When we get back, we'll talk about some World War III, physical World War III preparations. Things you should do, things you should know about nuclear weapons, and because my goal here is to prepare you mentally and physically and then spiritually for the times just ahead.
We live in critical times. If the final 7 years started today, would you know what to do? God's people need to understand the prophecies that are taking place. Daniel 11:33 says, "And they that understand among the people shall instruct many." To guide the people around us, we must first receive instruction ourselves on the biblical prophecies of the end time. End Time Ministries is introducing the End Time 1000. We have created Jerusalem Prophecy College online to help you be ready to inform those around you. The goal is to have at least 1,000 people prepared to instruct others. By joining the End Time 1000, you can fulfill Daniel 11:33. Sign up for Jerusalem Prophecy College online and be equipped to guide your friends and loved ones during the final 7 years. Go to JerusalemProphecyCollege.com. That's JerusalemProphecyCollege.com.
So, with the time I have left, I wanted to just talk about some basic World War III preparations. You say, well, how in the world can you prepare for a nuclear weapon, Dave? Well, I understand what you're talking about, but you need to at least have a plan. That's the number one thing. Have a plan. What would I do? Let's say we woke up tomorrow morning to a scenario where your siren was going off in your town. You turn on the radio and they say, folks, there's a nuclear submarine out in the Gulf of Mexico and it's pointed at the United States. You know, a nuclear attack is imminent, or one hit on the East Coast, they're threatening the West Coast or something. I don't know. I'm just saying, I'm trying to get your mind wrapped around this because it's coming. I'm not telling you this because I'm trying to sensationalize something for a radio program. That's not what I'm doing. I'm telling you this war is coming, and there's a possibility that it could touch the shores of the United States. Look at what we've got our hands in and everything in the around the world. In just about every conflict, the United States is involved in one way or the other. So you think that if World War III starts going off, that some of this stuff couldn't reach our shores. Now, we don't like to think about that. I don't like to think about it, but we've got to. So there's no reason why you wouldn't at least have a plan. What would I do? Now, obviously, if it's ground zero, there's no surviving that. You better be prepared spiritually if that's the point. And that's number one, really. You got to be prepared spiritually. Be born again above everything, because I could be hit by a bus on my way home tonight. So you got to be born again. That's number one. Spiritually, prepare yourself for eternity, because we don't know what the future holds. But we do know eternally we'll spend eternity in one of two places. That's number one. Number two, though, preparation physically and mentally. There are hundreds and hundreds of websites that you can go to that help you establish a plan that you can come up with. Like communication with your family. I mean, everything. If you're not thinking about it, you're going to be stuck. Let's say one of these things did go off, a nuclear weapon in one of the towns here in the United States, and you live close to that. What would you do? If you didn't think about it, you say, well, you're trying to get us to be preppers. I'm not trying to get you to be preppers. The Bible says, occupy till I come. But there's nothing wrong with physically preparing for some of this stuff, because we want to be able to facilitate the great revivals that are coming in the future. And so there's nothing wrong with you protecting your family, taking care of business. There's nothing wrong with that. As a Christian man of God, I'm going to do that for my family. Prepare for any kind of a scenario. There's nothing wrong with that. Now, I know God encamps His angels about them that fear Him, but there were still Christians killed in World War I and World War II. Think about it. And so I'm a Christian, but I know World War III is coming. There's nothing wrong with me at least having a plan. What would I do? I'm here about maybe we're in one of the north cities. I'm in Plano, Texas, just north of Dallas. Dallas is a huge city. You know, I don't want it to happen here, but it could. What would I do? So have a plan. Go to these hundreds of websites. Do your research. What would we do? And because my plan here in Dallas is not going to be your plan in Indianapolis, Indiana, or Fort Lauderdale, Florida. It's a different plan. So you got to have your own plan. What would we do? Where would we go? Number one, the next thing, should I stay or go? In other words, you've got to decide first if you need to prepare for where you're at. Can I stay in the house or the building that I'm in? We've thought about turning our End Time television studio into a place that if something happened in Dallas, we could come here because this is a concrete building. So we thought about that. So do I stay here, or do I need to have an evacuation plan where I can go somewhere else? It depends on where you're at, what's going on. You say, Dave, you're over sensationalizing this. Listen, I'm not doing that. I've done this in my Bible studies for years, and people they've wanted me to bring in people to show them how to prepare for different things because people want to know. I don't want to leave you guys out here and we haven't talked about this, and then it happens. I don't want that to happen. I want to be prepared, and I want to try to prepare people. So number three, what do you need to do first? Well, because the time is of the essence, you need to delegate and assign different members of your family specific tasks so they can all be accomplished at the same time. Hey, if this scenario happens, you need to, we've got walkie-talkies, we got some way of communicating. You're going to go here and do this. You're going to go get this supply. And there's things that you would do immediately. If you haven't got a plan like that set up, people are going to be scattering and it's going to be mass chaos. That's what most of society is going to happen to them because they don't want to think about it. But if you've got a plan put together, then you can kind of say, okay, I know what to do. This scenario happened, and really it's any catastrophe, a tornado, anything like that. If you've got a plan for a catastrophe, at least you've got a plan made, and you won't lose your mind. Because think about this, grocery stores will be empty. I know here in Dallas, if just a little ice storm happens, the grocery stores are empty. They will go wipe out the grocery stores immediately. Well, what happens if you don't make it to the grocery store? What are you going to do? So you got to think about scenarios like that. And your first priority is going to be assure your family's survival, shelter, water, food supplies. While some are working on some of your family are working on the water supply, you could look into shelter at your home. Other needs to be acquiring as much as possible, food and supplies. And you know, there's nothing wrong with having some of that stored up. And I'm not I'm not saying prepper. I'm not going into all that where you go bury yourself in the ground and you sit there with a big gun and you're waiting people to storm your door. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about having a plan to help you sustain through the few days. If a bomb was to go off, then you've got, you've got the fallout. You got all that stuff you got to deal with. If you can get yourself in a place where you've got supplies, you've communicating, you've got things to sustain yourself for just a few days, the biggest majority of the fallout will dissipate within a couple, 2 or 3 days, and you can go back outside and then get your bearings, figure out what's going on. If you had no plan at all, think about that. What a travesty that would be. So I'm just trying to prepare you for things coming in the future. You'd have to have food supplies. Much of the food and supplies listed on these different pages on the web, the guide they're going to quickly become unavailable. Think about it. So you might want to think about getting some flashlights and this, that, and the other. Put them in some 5-gallon buckets in your utility room. And that way you've got it. Because imagine, you're not going to be able, when this stuff happens and you're talking about mass hysteria, you're not going to be running to Walmart and picking up your supply list. It's not going to happen. The quantities are going to be greatly restricted, if not empty. And the streets and the stores are going to be unsafe probably after a while, except for a little while. And because people, if they find out you got food, man, it's Katie bar the door at that point. And in my neighborhood, I found out, because I've lived there forever, that people consider my home, if something happens to them, they've told their kids to come to my house. I didn't know about that till here a while back. They said, go to that guy's house right there. If something happens to mommy and daddy, that's the guy's house you're going to. They understand I'm a minister. I've talked to all of them, and they're sending them to my house. So at that point, I'm going to have some rations and different things where I can help people. That's another thing. If you just store up for yourself, that's one thing. But I mean, if you could have some for you and maybe some other people where you could at least sustain some people. Now, if it's a mad rush, that's just something you'll have to deal with. I understand, but I'm just talking about scenarios today, because we know this World War III is coming. It's prophesied in the Bible, and it could reach our shores. And you need to assign someone now. You got to get your plan put in place now. And that way they could immediately go to stores. They'd know what to do if something like that happened. Get cash from your bank if you can. Go to the ATMs. Try to use the credit cards at the stores. If at all possible, keep your cash, because you could use that to barter for stuff. You never know. You got to have water. You got to have shelter. If possible, you need to have a fallout shelter, a basement, or we're possibly talking about using the television studio here in the end time. I don't know. But I mean, we're looking into all this stuff, possibly for maybe a future scenario. You got to have essential details. So get detailed in your list. If you've accomplished all the things I've just said, securing your water supplies, your water, you've built a family fallout shelter, you've got one configured, then congratulations to you, because you've now succeeded in improving the odds of the survival of your family 100-fold. just having a plan and a few things put back, you've greatly increased your chances of survival compared to somebody who is just running around like a chicken with her head cut off, trying to go to a grocery store or imagine it's going to be chaos. And so you got to think about it. Now, I would rather have prepared and it never happened here in the United States than to have not prepared and it hit us like a ton. And you say, man, Dave, I can't believe you're talking about this today. We've got to talk about it. This is going to happen. It's going to happen in the world. Imagine, World War III is coming. Just as sure as World War I happened and World War II happened, World War III is coming. The prophecies of the Bible are very, very, very clear. And so I don't want to have never talked about it, and then everybody's like, what in the world? We never even had a plan. Get your plan together. There are many, many, many good websites that help you put a plan together for just a chaotic situation, not just a nuclear war would be the most extreme. But there are a lot of good websites that can help you, World War III websites and things like that. I'm not talking about going off the deep end and go burying yourself in a hole. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about simply helping you and your family make it through some of these times should they occur close to you and your family. You've got to have communication. Me and my wife, we've considered buying these walkie-talkies that can go for miles and, like 35 miles or something like that. Just so no matter what, I can get a hold of my wife and my kids. We could get together. We've already got a plan laid out, and we know exactly what each one's supposed to do. We show up at a specified location, and we can make it for that few days to the point where we could get back out, get our bearings, and know how to proceed from there. Popular Mechanics, all these different websites, they put together great, they've got lots of great information on what you should do, what to do in a nuclear attack. Now, with that said, on top of physical preparation, mental preparation, obviously, if it helps you to have a plan put together, it helps you mentally in the times just ahead. But before I get done with the program, absolutely, most importantly, is prepare yourself spiritually for eternity. You never know what could happen in the future as far as these chaotic events. Chaotic events will increase the closer we get to the end. Make sure you're ready for these last day scenarios. And we know, that's why I'm so thankful I understand the prophecies of the Bible. Going through the times just ahead, not understanding some of these things, what a travesty that would be. I'd be going out of my mind. But knowing these things are coming, I prepare myself and my family so that way I can go through these chaotic times and I don't lose my mind. But number one, be born again. Make sure you're prepared spiritually for eternity. That's absolutely number one. And so we can help you with that, obviously. That's what this whole ministry is devoted to do, is to prepare you mentally and physically for the times just ahead and spiritually for eternity, which is the absolute most important thing you can do in your life. So I do thank you for joining me today, everyone.
This has been End of the Age, brought to you by the faithful partners of End Time Ministries.
Thank you for watching. If you liked this video, subscribe to our YouTube channel and like our Facebook page.